So today's class is going to be on civil society. So this is unit 2, midpoint of unit 2, and we will be studying civil society. We are studying political institutions. So we have studied a couple of political institutions before. We started off by studying state and government, and now we are moving on to civil society. We studied state and government, then we studied political parties, then we studied pressure groups, and now we are moving into civil society. Okay, I need to give you guys a disclaimer before we start about this lesson. Now, by the time when we were done with state and government, if you felt like, okay, I understand this lesson really well, and when I taught you political parties, if you felt like, okay, you know what, I understand political parties now. And last week we studied pressure groups and the differences between political parties and pressure groups. And for that also you'll be like, okay, you know what, I understand this lesson. By the time we are done with civil society, you might not feel the same confidence you felt about the previous ones. Like the previous lessons, you really grabbed, you really caught it. You had a firm grip on political parties, pressure groups, state and government, everything. But after studying civil society, you'll feel like, you know what, I don't feel like I have like a really firm grip. I exactly don't understand what the civil society is. But that's fine. Do not worry that you don't understand this the way you understood the previous ones. It's not your fault. It's just the way of the lesson. It's just how this lesson is. Okay. If I give it to you in another example, right? Now, if I ask you to grab this is a water bottle, right? So this is a solid. Okay. So if you recall our O-level science memory, there are 3 formats things exist, right? You have solids, liquids, and gas, right? So if I ask you to hold a solid object, you can get a firm grip on that. Okay. But if I ask you to keep your hands like this and pour some water, you can't have a firm grip on water. It's just a matter of containing the water because that's a liquid. You can't hold a liquid. You can't have a firm grip on a liquid the same way you have a firm grip on a solid. Similarly, political parties, pressure groups, state and government, those are like solid concepts, right? So it's possible to get a firm grip. You understand exactly what political parties are. But civil society is like a very liquidy sort of like a concept. You won't get a firm grip on that, and that is not your fault. It's just the way of the concept. It's just the way. It is a very shaky concept. It's a very sketchy concept. Because of that, you might not get a firm grip. All you need to have is like a basic idea what the civil society is. Okay. Now, starting off with, if I meet one of y'all, right, and one of y'all want to know where a certain place exists, right? And let's say that you ask, imagine that Sharon comes and asks me, right? Sharon comes and asks me, sir, can you tell me where the Colombo Municipal Council is? So I'll be like, okay, from here you take the high level road, then you pass this junction and that junction, and then you pass the Nelumpokuna and then the roundabout, and you go forward, and then you have the Colombo Municipal Council. If you ask me to point it at a map, I can point out it at a map, right? I can tell you how to get to. It's a specific place. Okay. If she asked me, sir, can you tell me where your school is? Like Ananda College, where is it? So I'll be like, okay, you go to Borella and you turn towards Maradana and you go like this, and then you pass this place, that place, you have your school, right? But if Sharon asks me something like this, sir, can you tell me where the society is? Can I tell her like ආතන දෙහිවල junction එකෙන් වමට හරවලා right Mount පැත්තට පොඩ්ඩක් දුර යනකොට Singer Mega එක ගාවින් තියෙන second lane එකෙන් හරවලා චුට්ටක් දුර යනකොට that's a society. Can I say that? No. Right? You can't point out society at a map. But society is a thing that actually exists, right? Now, if I teach someone, sometimes when I teach students, right, sometimes the parents tell me, that sometimes I'm teaching the daughter in that house, right? And she has an older brother. Then the mother tells me, sir, that I have sent my son to the society, but I haven't sent my daughter to the society that much, right? So she doesn't understand how things work outside. So what does this mean? So both of them attend schools in Colombo. So at that time, the boy was a Josephian and the girl was a Bridgetian. That means both of them attend schools in Colombo, right? So is she referring to the places? As far as I know, like both of them have been going to the same school in the same vicinity. What does she mean by my daughter hasn't been to the society? It doesn't have a exact clear idea, right? It simply means that she hasn't associated people, she hasn't been to places, she hasn't experienced things. It's an overall concept, right? So society is an overall concept. It's not like your school, it's not like your church, it's not like your father's workplace where it is a specific place. Society is everywhere, and society is a combined component where you have people, experiences, places, social classes, groups, peer groups, all of them together, you call that society, right? So if someone asks you, do you know where your school is, what your school is, you have a very clear idea what your school is, where your school is. Someone asks, where is your church, where is your temple, you know exactly which church you are referring to, right? But if someone asks, what is your society, well, you kind of know what your society is, but at the same time you can't exactly explain what your society is, right? Don't we say sometimes, he's from a different society, which is why we don't get along. We're sort of from different societies, which is why we don't get along. So what do you exactly mean by that? It's kind of sketchy, right? So in political science also, political parties, pressure groups, state and governments, those are like your school or your church or your temple or your workplace, that you know exactly what we are talking about. You know where it exactly is. You know what it exactly is. Who is there, you know. But when you say civil society, that's like society in a political perspective, which is why that you won't exactly understand what civil society means, right? But at the same time, you know. Okay. So, which is why I said in the very beginning of the lesson, if you don't exactly get the idea, do not feel bad. Do not be demotivated the way you understood the previous topics. It's just like that. It's like knowing your school and knowing your society. Society is itself as a concept itself is a little sketchy. Okay, right. So first of all, we need to understand where is this word coming from. Okay, what is the origin of this word? Where is civil society coming from? Civil society comes from a particular theory that you guys have studied. Social contract theory. That's where the word originated from, right? They use the word civil society in a way that we don't exactly refer to it in the same way now, right? But the word's origin can be found in the social contract theory. Now, I have taught you guys social contract theory up to a certain point. Now, I'll just explain it once more. So, who are the two social contract theories? There are so many social contract theories, but mainly we have two important people. One is Thomas Hobbes, other one is John Locke. Okay. So you need to picture yourself in the 1600s in Great Britain, in England. You guys know that England has a queen as well as a parliament, and that's how it has been for a couple of centuries now. So back in the day in 1600s, like even before that, when they first established a parliament, in the beginning, the king was extremely powerful and the parliament had a very little power. It's the other way around now, right? Currently, the parliament runs a system. Queen is just a nominal executive. Okay. Practically, the parliament handles the system. Parliament runs the show. Queen is just there. But back in the day, it was the other way around. King is the one who handled everything. Parliament was just there nominally, right? So, but gradually the parliament started evolving little by little, little by little, little by little. So at one point, the parliament sort of came neck to neck with the king, right? At one point, the parliament was almost powerful as the king. That means like these were like 50-50 powerful, right? So this was during the 1600s. And by this time, there was an idea, like there was like a division within the British society. Who should have power? You guys know that parliament and the king having equal powers is no good. Like one has to take over, one has to take charge. Now it is a matter of who would take charge. Okay. So some people in the British community started saying, you know what, king should be more powerful. Others started saying, no, parliament should have more powers. Okay. So the older generation thought something, younger generations thought something. Can someone guess what old people supported and what young people supported with your common sense? Anyone?
Freedom.
Yeah. Which part did the young people support? Which part did the king and the parliament? Who supported the king? Who supported the parliament? Out of young people and old people.
Old people might have supported kings.
Yes, Sharon, that's correct. All people who were more traditional, who were more conservative, thought that the king should have control. Whereas the younger generation, the young blood, like the radical blood, they were like, no, parliament should have more power. We need more freedom for people, right? So there was an older gentleman called Mr. Thomas Hobbes, right? Who was a political scientist at this time. He decided to write a book to support this idea. Now, before the 1600s, there was something called the divine political theory. I think someone shared a meme also in a WhatsApp group about this, right? About the divine theory. So the basic idea is that the state is a creation of God, right? So this was the medieval times. Basically, the people who handled power, they used God's name to control people because these were highly religious times, right? So you put God's name on something, you get control on that. So that's exactly what they use. They said state is created by God. King is put in charge as the king by God. So you disobey the king, you disobey God. So you better obey the king. That was the theory that was followed. This is known as the divine theory of the state. This was there in the yesterday's paper we did, yesterday's model paper we did. Divine theory of the state. The idea that the state was created by God. Okay. But by 1600s, people were like, you know what? That theory doesn't really add up. I feel like this is something made up by these people just to get us to follow because, you know, we worship God and we don't want to disobey God. And I feel like these people are taking advantage of that. I feel like this theory has no value. So people started believing in, okay, you know what? I don't think state is created by God, which is when the people who supported the king had to come up with a new approach to continue king's powers, which is why Thomas Hobbes wrote a book called Leviathan or Leviathan, depends on how you pronounce it, right? As long as you spell it right in the paper, doesn't matter how you pronounce it, okay? Leviathan. He wrote a book called Leviathan. And he suggested, okay, you know what? I agree with this. State is not a creation of God. I don't agree with the divine theory. I think the state is a creation of a social contract. The people are like, what do you mean by that? So he explained everything in the book Leviathan, what happened. He said, in the very beginning of, you know, when humans happened on earth, there was no state. There was no state to control us. If there is no state, there's nothing to control us, right? So people were like doing whatever they wanted because there is no state, there is no law to control you, which is obviously not a pretty picture, right? The people being able to do whatever they want, right? In the beginning, it sounds really cool, right? I mean, imagine if you could do whatever you wanted, if you could go out and get whatever you wanted. It sounds cool in the beginning from an individual perspective, but don't forget that everyone else will want to do whatever they want as well, right? Now, imagine that if there is no state law, right, to stop you from doing whatever you want, right? You can go and kidnap the person you like, right? If you have like a crush on some person, the person is not interested in you back, right? If there is no state law to control you, you can go and grab them and bring them to your place. There's no state to punish you, right? And that's a state law that stops you from doing that at the moment. But don't forget, there will be other people that you don't like who would want to come and kidnap you also, right? It's not a pretty picture when everyone wants to do whatever they want. Okay. So according to John Locke, and sorry, now Thomas Hobbes, we're talking about Thomas Hobbes. According to Thomas Hobbes, this was a pretty bad time. Okay. The word he uses is sinister. He says it was a very sinister time, right? People were in their natural habitat, natural behavior, Okay, when people are in their natural behavior, it's not that great, right? It's not good when people are in their natural habitat,
So
natural behavior.
what did they actually mean? What did they actually mean by natural behavior?
Naturally, what you want, as I told you, right? Naturally, you might have a crush on someone and you want to be with that person. What stops you from doing that? The state law. Understand? Naturally, you would want to, let's say that, you don't have food and your neighbors are having like a nice meal. What stops you from like, going inside and hitting them with clubs and taking that meal and coming to your place and eating that? The state law, right? It's not nice if we are in a natural habitat. Think about the natural cravings, the like wantings we get, right? And we can go to extreme measures to get what we want. And we need a state to control us from doing that, because when everyone goes after what they want, it's going to be a bad place, which is why Thomas Hobbes said in the beginning of the human civilization, there was no state. This was a pre-state time, and it was a bad time because it was a sinister time. People were going behind whatever they wanted, and it wasn't a pretty picture, right? Which is why at one point people were like, okay, you know what? This is really getting out of hand, right? People are just going behind whatever they want, and this is not good. We really have to do something about this. That's when people sat together to come up with a social contract. Okay. They came up with a social contract. They entered into a contract, right? They sat together and they came up with a contract. They signed a contract and they established an institute called the state and put the king in charge. All right. So let me put the whiteboard and explain it to you. So according to Thomas Hobbes, he says, now, if this is the table, it's very difficult to draw without my, okay, if this is the table, okay, it was the people who sat around it, right? People sat around the table like this. People sat around the table like this. And they signed the contract. This is the contract that they signed. So the contract says, let's establish the state. Let's put the king in charge and all that. And all of these people who are sitting around the table signed it. And this contract says the king is in charge now. The king is in charge. Now, did the king sign anything? Did the king sign anything? No. People signed the contract, right? People signed the contract and said, here, king, we signed a contract and we decided to put you in charge. Now, king didn't sign anything, right? That means king is a result of the contract. King is not a party of the contract. People are the parties of the contract, right? So because of that, since king didn't sign anything, king didn't agree to anything, king is not bound by any terms. He never read any terms and he never agreed to any terms and signed any terms. People were the ones who read the terms and signed. Okay. So because of that, king's powers are limitless. It's limitless, right? No limits. Because king never agreed to anything. This is what Thomas Hobbes said, right? Then came a young guy called John Locke, right? He also wrote a book called Two Treatises on the Government. He came up with his own version of social contract theory. Okay. So in his theory, he said, okay, you know what? Hobbes, I agree with you, right? I agree with you. I agree with you that up to a certain point, I agree with you, humans didn't have a state at the beginning. Because of that, people were sinister. And at one point, people decided to sit together and have a contract and establish a state or whatever, right? Fine, I agree with that. But I disagree with you on one thing. Okay. The contract was not signed between people and people. In fact, the contract was signed between people and the king. Right? on the table, people sat on one side. Wait. King sat on the other. Wait. How do I put the normal pen here? All right, sorry. Right? So people sat on one side. King sat on the other side. And they agreed to the contract. Right? People were like, okay, we have read our parts. We have signed. We read and we signed. Right? King was also, okay, we read our part and we also signed. I also signed my part. Now, the king has agreed. King is also a party of the contract. That means king doesn't have limitless powers. King gets the powers that are agreed upon on the contract. The king read his powers and he agreed. Understand? This is the difference between these two social contract theories. Okay. Now, if I give it to you in a more understandable manner, right? Imagine in this class that, let's say I am not in this class, that you guys get together. So there are 21 people, including myself, right? Let's say I'm not here. 20 of you all are there. And there is no rule to continue. There's no rule to control you all. That means that you all will be in your natural behavior, which is obviously not going to be that nice. Okay. So all of you all will be killing each other and assaulting each other and harassing each other and right. And all that. So at one point you guys are like, okay, you know what? This is bad. This is horrible. This is sinister. So we need to have a state and we need to get a king and put the king in charge. And you guys sit together and you all sign a contract and appoint a state. So according to Thomas Hobbes, you guys agree into a contract, not me, right? You all sit together and you all agree into a contract and then you all come see me with that contract saying, sir, we have decided to put you as the king in this class, right? I take it now. Okay, fine. You want me to be king? All right, cool. And I'm the king. Now my powers aren't restricted. Why? I never agreed to any contract. I never agreed to any terms. You guys signed the contract and you all appointed me as king. That means I can do whatever I want. You guys need to listen to whatever the orders I give you. You can't question that. Okay, so the king should have more power, not the parliament. Because I'm a result.
I kind of agree with Thomas.
Sorry, Rakib?
I kind of agree with Thomas Hobbes.
Well, yeah, that's power politics, right? That's power politics. So he believes in like a strong ruler, right? So I have no ties. I have no ties, contractual ties, because I never agreed to a contract. It was you guys who agreed to the contract. John Locke disagrees. John Locke says, no, you guys sat on one side of the table. I sat on the other side of the table. Then we agreed on the contract. You guys said, sir, these are our terms. We are appointing you as king. If you agree to these terms, you can sign the contract, then we'll make you king. Then I read the contract. Okay, fine. These powers seem okay to me. And I signed the contract. And now I have signed a contract. That means my powers are limited to the powers that are given in the contract, which means the parliament should have more powers, not the king, right? So these are two differences between John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, right? So anyways, we will be studying the social contract theory in the third unit. For now, what's important to us is this whole idea of like before state and after state, right? So before state, we were in a natural behavior, natural habitat. That means that is the natural society. After state, we were more civilized. We were more civilized. That means that is the civil behavior. Hence, that society is known as the civil society. This is how this word came into existence, right? Before state, it was a natural society. After state, it was a civil society. When people are acting natural, it's a natural society. When people are acting civilized, It's a civil society. That's how this word came into existence. Okay. But in the current context, that's not how we use this term. Okay. In the current context, that's not how we use this term. As I told you before, this term is a little sketchy, right? It's a little difficult to understand what this term exactly means. Okay. So because of that, the term civil society has been explained differently, interpreted differently by different groups. Okay. You see political parties, pressure groups, it's like there's one standard idea what a political party is. But civil society, because these very different from one another, it has been interpreted differently by one another, right? Some people say this is what the civil society is, other people say this is what the civil society is, which is why in our syllabus, we have 6 different interpretations of the civil society, right? We have the classic liberal interpretation, we have the Marxist interpretation, original Marxist interpretation, then we have the neo-Marxist interpretation, associational democratic interpretation, then civil society as a social political movement, and civil society as a platform for social movements. Okay, right. So let's check out one by one, right? Let's check out one by one and what do these mean? Okay, right. Before that, we need to sort of have an idea, the basic idea about what this means. So in general, when it comes to civil society, okay, we normally refer to civil society as that area that people can be active. What does that mean? The area people can be active. Okay. Now, imagine your house, where your house is located, right? In front of a house, there is a road, right? Imagine across the road, you have some government office, presidential secretariat office, or some ministry, or some governmental office. So that's exactly in front of your house, right? So think of it as this. Okay. Think of it as the normal setting of a state. So your house is your private sphere, your private circle. Okay. Where you are as a person, right? If we take, let's say, if we take someone as an example, if we take Ranali, right? Ranali's house is her personal sphere, right? That's where she is Ranali Suraveera as a person. Okay. She crosses the road and enters that governmental building, right? Governmental office, state office. That's where she is Ranali Suraveera, the citizen. That's a public sphere, right? Inside her house, she has her duties as a daughter, as a sister. I don't know whether you have any siblings. I'm just assuming. Okay. As a daughter, as a sibling, right? As a friend, as a student here, like this class we are having, she's a colleague to you all. She's a student to me, right? Or as a cousin, as a neighbor, right? Maybe someday later as a wife, as a mother, right? So those things, your personal duties, your duty towards your parents, your siblings, your spouse, your friends, your teachers, your students, that is your personal sphere. You are a person there. Ranali Suraveera, the person who is a daughter, who is a sibling, who is a neighbor, who is a friend. So those things stay within that limit, that border, her house, inside her house. Once she crosses the road and enters that governmental building, she's not a daughter anymore. She's not a sibling or a friend anymore. She's a citizen there. That means her duties towards her state, right? So inside her house, she should take care of her parents, right? She should, be nice to her friends, right? Take care of her pets, okay? Study well. Those are the duties she has as a person. Ranali Suraveera, the person, those are the duties she has as a person inside her private sphere, her personal sphere. Once she crosses the road and enters a governmental building, she doesn't have to be nice to anyone or be friends or take care of anyone. No, there she has to cast her vote, pay the taxes, obey the laws, right? Those are the duties she has in that sphere. That's a public sphere. So think of it as personal roles, right? We all have two roles. Okay. Inside our personal lives, we have personal duties towards our family and friends and people we normally interact with. Once you go to your state, you have other duties in your public sphere, as like, casting your vote, paying your taxes or whatever, as a citizen. Okay. Then what about the road in front of your house? The moment you exit your gate, the moment you exit your public sphere, you don't enter the moment you exit your personal sphere, private sphere, you don't enter the public sphere straight away, right? You exit your gate, there is a road that you need to cross to get to the governmental building, right? Is that road a part of the government office? No. Is that road a part of your public sphere? Does that belong to your house property? No. Does that belong to that government officer's property? No. It's a transitional bridge, right? It's an area that doesn't belong to either of those. It's a neutral zone. That is the civil society, right? When you exit your family sphere, public sphere, right? When Ranali exits her family, right? Before she enters the state territory, she has a space that she can be politically active. Okay. Now imagine that she wants certain rights. Imagine that she hasn't been given proper rights by the state. Okay. So that means she needs to be talking to the government. So she needs to talk to Gotabaya. So where does Gotabaya live? President Gotabaya lives across the road in that governmental building, right? That's a state sphere. Inside your house, like Ranali lives inside her house. Now, does it work if she shouts inside the house? She sits in front of her, she sits in front of her parents and, she sits in the sofa and she shouts saying, my rights, I need my rights, I want my rights to be given. The state has ripped off my rights. Pointless. Her parents will hear, her siblings will hear, her neighbors will hear. They can't do anything. Right? You need the attention of the state. You need the attention of the government if you want your rights, right? So you need to exit your family, your public sphere. But you can't shout inside the state also, right? Can you go inside Gotabaya's office and shout saying, I want my rights? Gotabaya, what you are doing, man? Like you have to give me my rights and all that, right? Right? You can't be doing that. You can't violate discipline rules inside the governmental office. Now, do you see that road in the middle, the buffer zone between your family and your state? That is an ideal spot, right? Because you will be heard and you're not attacking the state straight away. So you can go to the road. Ranali, you can go to the road, hold the board saying, I want my rights. Mr. President, you better give me my rights. I'm a citizen. I deserve my rights, right? So not only Ranali, others also can go. Pankaj can also go. Akhil can also go. Dhyani can also go, right? All of y'all, whoever has their rights violated can use that road to shout, to get the rights that you deserve. Understand? Right? So if you think of it from a principal perspective, civil society is that middle ground you have in between the state and your family, right? You as a person and you as a citizen are two spheres, and there is a ground in the middle that is a civil society where you will be a citizen, but you are outside the state that you can shout, right? Because you enter the state and shout, you can't do that, right? You enter Gotabaya's office and you shout, they will throw you out, right? But they can't throw you out if you are shouting on the roads, which is why all those protests take place in public places. Have you seen those rallies and stuff happening in those roundabouts, like in the Lipton roundabout and or Maradano, any of those places? That's where they do protests, public spaces. They are not shouting inside their houses. What's the point? Only their family members can hear. They can't go inside Gotabaya's office and shout. No, that's a state territory. You can't go there and be violent, which is why you have a public space in the middle that will give you the space to be active. Understand? So in general, that's what it means, civil society. Okay. So what do people do in the civil society? They protest, they do rallies, they shout, right? They do pickets. So civil society is that one area that is outside your family and outside the state sphere also, where you have your freedom to be politically active. You remember we studied about pressure groups last week. Where do pressure groups do their thing? In the civil society space. So civil society is a space, right? But as I told you, when you say civil society, it's the space, the people, what they do, everything it's a collective term, right? So the best way to understand the civil society is like thinking about your house, having a road in front, across the road, having the state, right? So if you have a bone to pick with the state, you can go to this road and do it, right? So it's like a neutral zone. It's like a neutral zone. It is neither your family, neither your state, somewhere in between. Okay. So this is the basic idea. And there are different people who have interpreted this differently. So we'll get to that and we'll explain one by one. What do they mean? Okay. Right. So civil society. Senumi, can you read this note off the screen?
Okay, sir. Civil society. Although civil society is a political entity that is given the least attention in politics, it is the largest and the most powerful entity in the modern context. Unlike political parties and pressure groups, the civil society does not have specific organizational structure nor official members. In general, the civil society is defined as a social platform of individual citizens to get united outside the store of their common motives. Although citizen organizations and social movements are defined as the civil society, that is in fact a narrow and limited interpretation of civil society. According to the modern democratic principles, the civil society is given prominence as a main feature of democracy. Having a strong and active civil society is considered as a reflection of a strong democratic system. In the modern political context of Sri Lanka, the term civil society is used in many different contexts. The first interpretation that the society consisted of active citizens. This means citizens of the political society being actively engaged in discussion, criticism, etc. The concept of civil society has existed for a long time since the 17th century. However, after many developments and evolving civil society became an important element of political science in 1980s. The civil society reflects the democratic status of a country, since a non-democratic system would have either a weak civil society or no civil society at all. Since Aristotle defined humans as political creatures, the human cannot live outside a political system. Therefore, inside a political system, humans create a web of political connections with each other. In this web of connections, humans discuss many social facts including politics. At times, these discussions can evolve into criticism and movements. Though these humans get united for a common social political cause as citizens, these citizens act independent from the state to be organized for common motives. The space that citizens function, known as the civil society, and their organizations are known as the civil society organizations. Therefore, civil society is a space that is external from the state and outside of the authority of the state. This space is in social atmosphere that allows citizens to act without a state authority in following areas. Number 1, cultural activities. Number 2, religious activities. Number 3, political activities. Number 4, economic activities. Number 5, professional activities. Number 6, social activities. The civil society represents the right to organization of a citizen. Therefore, a citizen can form an organization in this social space outside the authority of the state. These organizations are as follows: a professional union, a sports union, a non-governmental organization, a religious union, an organization of ladies, a youth organization, a welfare union, the organizers union of a religious institute. The content.
Okay, right, hold on, thanks.
Okay.
Now, as you can see, any of these can be a civil society organization. What does that mean? Like any of these people, professionals, maybe sports people, or maybe like ladies, right? They can get together, or youth people can start an organization, and they start being active in the civil society, right? Going to the road and shouting. Remember, like that's a road in the middle of, like, you know, your family and the state, right? So also we noticed something important in the previous paragraph also. Here, the civil society reflects the democratic status of a country. Now, as I told you, true that you can shout inside Gotabe's office, but if you are shouting in front of Gotabe's office holding boards, you have the right to do that because you are being active in your civil society. You are not breaking any laws, right? You are just occupying that neutral space that is given to you. But if the state comes and, you know, some police jeeps comes and hits you, or like some white man comes and grabs you and go, that is not very democratic, right? Civil society should be free for people to go out and say what the problems they have, right? So if you have a good active civil society, it reflects the democratic status of the country as well. Okay, right. Now we are looking into the main eras and the main streams of civil society. Okay, right. Sharon, can you read from that point onwards?
The context of civil society was initiated in the 17th century through it evolved into a mainstream topic in 1980s. The discussion on the civil society can mainly be divided into three eras. The discussion in the constitutional state following the classic liberal state in Europe, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Immanuel Kant were the mainstream philosophers. The discussion in the capitalistic economic and social system in 18th and 19th centuries, Adam Smith, Adam Ferguson, Hegel, Karl Marx, etc., are considered as mainstream philosophers to make notable contributions. The initial stage that suggested the civil society is independent from the state. Under the discussion of civil society has different interpretation in modern political science. Classical liberal interpretation, original Marxist interpretation, neo-Marxist, Gramscian interpretation, associational democratic interpretation as a space for democratic social and political activities, as a space for social movements.
Okay,
Classical liberal.
Okay, thank you. Now I will give you guys 6 minutes. Okay, you need to memorize these 6. Because it is important to memorize these 6. I'll give you an easy way. Just couple them up. Okay. First one and fourth one are connected. Classic liberal and associational democratic. Both are liberal democratic. Okay. Second one and third one also can be coupled up because one is the original Marxist one, other one is a neo-Marxist one. Okay. And of course, the other one as a space. One is as a space for democratic social political activities, other one for space for social movements, right? You need to memorize these 6 before we explain. All right.
Right. So let's take a look at these 6. Okay. How do they work? First, you have the classic liberal interpretation. Classic liberal interpretation. So this is how it works. Now, think about the picture I gave you. This is your family and your area, right? This is your personal sphere. All right. State sphere. This is where you are a person. This is where you are a citizen. Okay. Right. The road in the middle. This is the civil society, right? This is the civil society. The area that you have free to, go ahead and get the rights you have. So you guys know classic liberalism. Classic liberalism is all. The basic idea is keeping the state control to a minimum level, right? So what the classic liberalists are saying is that the state, which is this sphere, okay, state should not have any control over the civil society. No, do not do this, right? That's pretty much what they are saying. What they are saying is restrict themselves, completely restrict themselves, controlling, having any sort of control, making any sort of involvement in this civil society space, right? Civil society space. Classic liberalism has sort of like swore an oath sort of thing to protect this civil society space from any sort of state intervention. So all the classic liberalists like John Locke and all that, right? All of them are so like they can't emphasize this enough. Do not interfere. Do not interfere. Leave this space alone. State, do not interfere. Let people to act free in this civil society. Okay. So what the classic liberal interpretation says is that this civil society, this space in the middle, right, is a free zone, free from the state sphere. It is outside the state sphere. It should be completely free from any state intervention. That's what the civil society interpretation on classic liberalism say. Except for there is one guy who disagrees. There is one classic liberal, Mr. Hegel has a different idea, right? Hegel thinks something different. Hegel agrees, yes, that, this part, yes, like, civil society should be completely free from the state sphere. State should exception. He gives one exception. May have to come and get involved. Sometimes the state may have to come get involved. Sometimes, right? Yes, in general, no, I understand. In general, no. Okay. But sometimes the state may have to come get involved. Sometimes. So what are the sometimes he's talking about? When people have problems, when people have issues. Okay. Now, what does that mean? When you're here inside your personal sphere, you have a support system, right? You have your parents, you have your siblings, you have your neighbors, you have your friends. Right now, the previous example we talked about was, like, we talked about Ranali living inside her family, right? And her walking. But when Ranali is here, if she has a problem, people who love her and who care for her. According to Hegel, inside this sphere, you have love and affection, right? Ranali's people will be there for her. Her siblings will be there for her, right? Her neighbors will be there for her. Friends will be there for her, right? Us as classmates. Now, everywhere you have a love and affection based relationship, right? Everyone you interact here with in this sphere, right? Now in this class, if she has some personal problem, she may talk to a friend. The friend will be there for her. If she has some other problem, she will talk to her parents. Parents will be there for her, right? If she has an academic problem, she can talk to me. As a teacher, I will be helping her, right? So why does that happen? Is it like for money, right? Is it because she pays me a class fee that I'm going to, help her with one of the problems she has? Not necessarily. I would get my class fee even if I only. Right. Okay. So because of that, you need to make sure that the state is there, right? So as I explained before, because there's no, right, in this middle ground, inside the family only you get that love and care and affection, right? Then you have the state, then you have the middle ground, right? You have the middle ground. So in this middle ground, civil society, true that the state should not make involvement, state should not get involved, state should leave this alone. But when people have issues here, when people face issues inside this, state should come and help these people out sometimes, right? So Hegel has a slightly different idea comparing to other classic liberals. Other classic liberals say that state just completely stay away. You have no business happening here. Leave this space alone. It's only for people, right? But except for Hegel, who believes in this whole idea of love and care. Okay, right. So let's find that out. Right. Pankaj, can you read the classic liberal interpretation?
Classic liberal interpretation. Classic liberalism comes to the spotlight as a political theory around the 18th century. However, the theoretical foundation for classical liberalism did develop since the 16th century, when the civil society is studied from a classical liberalism point of view. Following philosophers are considered to be important: Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Immanuel Kant, and Hegel. The concept of civil society was initially established in Europe in the process of the origin of the national state. The term civil society was initially used by the British philosopher Thomas Hobbes in his book Leviathan in 1652. Even John Locke and Immanuel Kant have both interpreted civil society as the same concept. Therefore, these three are commonly known as social convention theorists. According to social convention theorists, the human society is divided into two eras. One, the era before state, pre-state era, natural society. Number two, the era after state, post-state era, civil society. In the pre-state era, the state did not exist, hence humans were not ruled. Humans lived a life where every person had natural rights under the natural law. This means every human had the space to do anything without any restrictions. The social convention theory believes that due to this freedom, the society ended up in a complex entanglement. Therefore, humans in the natural society took steps to unite together and develop an authority through a social convention. The society that had an authority to govern the humans was known as the civil society. Under this definition, the society where the human desires and activities are not controlled is the natural society. Where the desires and activities are controlled are known as civil society. John Locke and Thomas Hobbes both provide that the beginning of the civil society was done through a social convention in order to make the society a much more civilized place. However, Hobbes believed that the convention was between people and the ruler is simply a result of the convention. Hence, Hobbes provides that the ruler is not bound to people for his actions. However, John Locke believes that the convention was between people and the ruler, hence the ruler needs to be responsible to people. The opinion of individual citizens having natural rights laid the foundation for the concept of the classical liberal theory. With the development of capitalism, the concept of civil society grew further. The civil society received a new interpretation under this economic foundation. The traditional idea of the state being linked to every entity of the society was denied by this time. This was due to the fact that the concept of civil society grew as a separate entity from the state, with Locke's opinion and economic process was defined as a separate entity under capitalism. This was further supported by the book Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith and the book on the essay on the history of civil society by Adam Ferguson. Hegel believed that the society is the space in between the state and the family. According to Hegel, family represents the personal field and the state represents the common field. The space in between is the civil society. This space is not a capital market, but something generated by the capital market. According to Hegel, the society has three fields: one, family; two, civil society; and three, state. In a family, problems are solved with emotion, love, and affection. However, with the competition created by the capitalistic market, these elements cannot be seen in the civil society. Hegel believed that the civil society would fall due to the selfishness and capitalistic competition and the lack of love, affection, and ethics. Under these circumstances, the state requires to intervene for common requirements. Hence, Hegel denies the stateless civil society system suggested by Adam Smith and Adam Ferguson.
Right. Okay. Now there are two pictures of Hegel and Kant, right? So Hegel slightly disagrees with his other liberal buddies because he believes in like state interventions to solve people's problems. Now, if you have the printed version of the textbook, right, I have left a box here for you to draw what I just drew. If you don't have the book, then take a paper and draw, right, what I drew in the whiteboard. So one sphere here, right? Draw. I will just casually draw here, right? Okay, draw a sphere like this. So as a family, right? And then draw another sphere as a state, right? So name this the family and name this one the state, and the space in between is the civil society. Okay, so just write it the way that works for you, right? Like, normally classic liberalists say, this should not be done. No. Right? But Hegel believes something different. Hegel believes, right, they need to help people out. Right. I don't have my mouse today, so it's a little difficult to draw. Okay, right. Draw something like that. So that will explain exactly what the classic liberalists say about the civil society. Okay. Right. Now let's find out what the Marxists have to say about this. Original Marxists. Surprise, surprise, Karl Marx thinks that this is a trick played by the rich people to suppress the poor people. Whatever you ask from Karl Marx, that's the answer he gives, right? So you go and ask Karl Marx what the civil society is. So he thinks that's a trick played by the rich people. Okay. Let me use the whiteboard. Right. Let's use a whiteboard to explain. Right. So the basic idea of, okay, you know what, that you have the family, then you have the state, right? So this being the family and this being the state, and the space in between being the civil society. Okay, that's the idea, right? So classic liberalists say this part should be free from the state and you shouldn't get involved. And except for Hegel, who gives one exception, that they should be able to come and help because, there's no love and affection, right? However, what do you think about this idea? Do you think that the state should get involved and whatever? Karl Marx is like, what is this? Civil society? I'm sorry. What? Civil society? There's no such thing. There's no such thing called civil society, right? There is no another sphere called state. The entire thing is one. The entire thing is one sphere. That's called the capitalistic market. It's a market that functions on money. You don't have like something separate called family. You don't have something separate called civil society. You don't have something separate called state, right? It's all just one big entity called the capitalistic market, where everything depends on money. Everything depends on money, right? This is inside this, you have families and you have the states and whatever, everything is inside this. Everything depends on money, right? So you remember, he thinks that the state is an instrument created by rich people to suppress the poor people, right? So he believes that the entire society is based on one thing called the capitalistic market, and there's nothing called, the family or the state, or none of these spheres exist, right? It's just one big entity called capitalistic market. This is what it's about, right? Capitalistic market. One sphere called the capitalistic market, right? Then you go and ask Karl Marx, okay, what about Hegel? Hegel said that, state should come and help people because there's no love and affection. Karl Marx is like, wait, what? That's just utter nonsense, okay? You want to solve people's problems? State invention is not the way. You need a revolution. You want to solve people's problems? One word. I give you one word for you. Revolution. Working class has to stand up and go for a revolution if you want to solve the problems. The state coming and getting involved, and no, that doesn't work, right? There's only one way to solve the problem. That's by going into a revolution. That's it. Simple as that. Okay. Yes, Dan. You have a question?
Okay, never mind, you're recording.
Okay, right. Okay. Right. So let's find out what Karl Marx is up to, right? Let's read this and find out. Ranali, can you read?
Original Marxist interpretation. This interpretation was developed against the concept of Hegel. According to the political economic approach and communism, the civil society is the capitalistic market itself. However, Hegel disagrees and provides that civil society is the space between the state and the family. Hegel further states that the civil society is originated with influence of the capitalistic market, and at one point it turns into conflicts due to lack of love and affection. Therefore, Hegel expects state interventions to handle this situation. In the Marxist interpretation of civil society, Karl Marx criticizes the opinion of Hegel. This criticism was published by Marx in his book, A Criticism on Hegel's State, in 1843. Marx agrees with Hegel up to the point where it says the civil society to be a capitalistic society, the capitalistic society to be the field of selfish competition and the lack of love and affection in the civil society. However, Hegel's opinion of state involvement to solve problems in the civil society is completely denied by Marx. Marx believes that the problem in the civil society can only be solved by breaking the capitalistic system through a working class revolution. Instead of Hegel's system of tackling conflicts in the civil society by state involvements, Marx suggests to solve civil society conflicts within the civil society itself. Although Hegel believed the state to be a representation of the common field, Marx points out that the state is the creation of the rich class itself. The Marxist interpretation believes that the civil society is the social space for the poor class to take over the state and create a socialist system where unfair labor is no more.
Right. Now I've left another box for you all to draw. Just draw one big box and name that as the capitalistic market, right? And you can write it right below in a red pen. The only solution for problems is a working class revolution. That's what Karl Marx says. Okay. I'll give you a minute to jot that down. Right, so that's what Karl Marx originally says. Then let's find out what these neo-Marxists say. Who are the neo-Marxists? People who followed Marxism but who added things to what Karl Marx originally said. So we are talking about Antonio Gramsci. He's an Italian Marxist philosopher, right? So he was studying about what happened in Italy, right? So in many countries such as Russia, when liberal capitalism failed, Marxists took control, right? But in Italy, that was not possible because in Italy, the fascist people caught the power once the capitalism failed. So he was sort of studying what actually happened in Italy, right? So he found out certain facts and he wrote, this is his work. Now, explaining, let me use the whiteboard to explain this again. Right. So, unlike his agree, like he doesn't completely disagree with the idea that civil society doesn't exist, right? He's like, yes, I understand that my mentor, my boss, he said that, there are no three spheres called family and civil society and state. But you know what? Unlike my boss, I agree with that. Yes, there is a family, there is the state, and the middle ground is the civil society. I agree with that. Okay. Then what does he say? What does Antonio Gramsci says? Antonio Gramsci says, you remember what Karl Marx originally said? He said that we need to go for a revolution, right? He said we need to go for a revolution and take this state power. Gramsci said, if you go with what Karl Marx originally said, you need to capture this part. You need to capture this part. And then you're sorted. That's what Karl Marx says. You go ahead, you do a revolution, you capture the state, then you are done. Then, you can establish a socialist state and eventually you can go towards communism. But Gramsci says, I don't think that will be enough. Because although you say that civil society is independent from the state, you see those organizations in the civil society like the pressure groups or the women's organizations or the youth organizations, whoever that is functioning inside the civil society also have ties to state, right? They also have ties to the state. So if you really want to capture the power, just capturing the state is not enough. You need to capture the civil society as well, right? Just by capturing the executive, capturing the legislature, capturing the police and the forces and the prisons is not enough. You actually need to capture those civil society organizations also, whatever the youth organizations, women's organizations, professional unions, trade unions, you need to capture those also. Why? Because those are also ran by the people who are in the state, right? So if you leave this part out, right? If you leave this part out, these people may organize themselves here. The state running people will organize themselves here and attack again. And they will capture state again, right? So you really want to take control? Capturing the state alone is not enough. You capture the state, then you capture the civil society as well. Simple as that. Okay. Right. So let's read and find out what Gramsci says exactly. Right. So Sudhu, can you read?
Yes, sir. So you can hear me, right?
We can hear you.
Antonio Gramsci was an Italian Marxist philosopher who took forward the Marxist civil society interpretation even further. According to this interpretation, the civil society is consisted of unions developed by citizens. Therefore, this includes sports union, cultural union, labor union, etc. Gramscian's interpretation of civil society arose as a result of his attempt to find answers to the question, why does the labor class in Italy fails to capture the state power? In Italy, Marxists emerged to find political power due to the failure of capitalism. Yet, they failed to convert that into governmental power. As a result, the governmental power was captured by fascists. Under this circumstance, Gramsci studied the method used by Italian state for successful governance. According to Marxist interpretation, the state is consisted of suppressive institutes. The military, police prisons, administrations are such institutes. Marxists believe that attacking the capitalistic society can be done by taking over the institutes mentioned above. However, Gramscian points out that the state is not simply consisted of the above institutions. Hence, in order to capture the state power, it is necessary to take over other external ideological fields as well. Gramscian identifies the civil society as one of these fields. Therefore, religious organizations, trade unions, professional unions, women's organizations, art unions, and sport associations, etc., which are formed external to the state, are also dominated by the rich class. Therefore, Gramscians point out that the state dominance is not limited to military, police, prison, and administration, etc. Even the civil society is dominated by the state religious, culturally, educationally, and ideologically. Gramscian further points out that the state uses patriotism, nationalism, social welfare as methods to establish their dominance in the state as well as in the civil society. Hence, the civil society is a field external from state that is ideologically dominated by the rich class. In conclusion, it can be seen that Gramscian has further developed Marxism. According to his interpretation, the labor class in Italy failed to capture governmental power, since taking over the state not only includes suspicious institutes, but it includes dominating the civil society as well.
Right. Now you can see a picture of Gramsci, and this is the book he wrote, right? The Concept of Hegemony. And there is a box, empty box below for you to draw what I just drew, right? You can draw the three spheres, the state, the family, and the space in between, and how, according to Gramsci, that you need to capture both. If you need power, the working class revolution should capture the state as well as the civil society institutions as well. Okay.
Now that we have discussed three of civil society interpretations, right? We saw what the classic liberalists are saying. We saw what the Marxists are saying. We saw what neo-Marxists are saying. Now, we are moving on to the other ones. These are minor ones compared to the previous ones. Okay, now first thing we have to study, the fourth interpretation is the associational democratic interpretation. Okay, so these three are separated because like the earlier three, you remember it's a matter of like, you draw those things. It's like this sphere, that sphere and all that, like whether it's all one sphere or taking over this sphere, whatever. So it's like those three go parallel with one another. These three are completely different interpretations, right? So association democratic interpretation. First, we need to understand this was brought up by Mr. Alexis de Tocqueville. Okay. Alexis de Tocqueville was the person who came up with this. So he talks about democracy. What is democracy? Democracy is people governing people, right? But okay, imagine something like this. Imagine that we want to play music in this class. Like when we are going for a break, we need to play music. Okay. So we decide to have a vote whether it's going to be BTS music or non-BTS music. Okay. What's the democratic way of deciding what way to go? Now, if I decide, okay, you know what? I am playing rock music because I am the teacher. I decide the music I like, not playing BTS. That's not very democratic, right? That's because me just going with what I like. Okay. What is the best way to do? What is the best thing to do? What is the most democratic way of deciding? Voting, right? So if the majority of you like BTS music, we can play that. We can have a vote, right? So let's say we have a vote, right? That means us governing ourselves. That's democracy. But although now the majority likes BTS music to be played, it doesn't mean everybody likes that music, right? It means the majority will get their way, whereas the minority doesn't. Do you understand? This is in very basic ways I'm explaining democracy to you in a way that you will understand, relatable, right? Democracy means going with what the majority wants. We have Gotabaya Rajapaksa as the president of our country. Why? Because 52% of the people wanted him to be the president. 52%. But he is the president for 100% of the Sri Lankans. What about the 48% who didn't want him to be president? Right? So because democracy always goes with what majority wants, often you have a minority who is not represented by the government. Okay, so Mr. Tocqueville recognizes this as a flaw in democracy. This is a weakness in democracy. The minority is sort of like being left out. So what to do about this? So he identifies the civil society as the solution. Okay, civil society as the cover up for this loophole. The loophole of democracy where you sort of leave out the minorities in democracy. Okay. Now imagine 52% of the people wanted Gotabaya Rajapaksa to be president. Hence he is the president. So we have 52% of the people represented by the current government we have. But we have 48% of the people who is not represented by the government. That 48%, I said 48, right? Did I say 58 before? 48, right? Okay. 52% versus 48%. So the 52% who voted for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, that 52% is represented by the government. The remaining 48% does not get that representation. Okay. So what to do? For those people, for that 48%, you have the civil society. That is a space that you can come out and shout and protest and say what you want because the government doesn't represent you. What about the minorities, right? That we have a reasonable participation of minorities in these classes, right? We have a lot of Tamil people and Muslim people in this class. Okay, so given that Sri Lanka is a majority Sinhalese country, obviously the government is going to be majority Sinhalese. The president is most of the times going to be a Sinhalese. By the way, it doesn't say in the constitution president has to be a Sinhalese Buddhist anywhere, right? Anyone can be president as long as that person is Sri Lankan citizen. In terms of practicality, given that country is 70% Sinhalese, most of the times, most likely, to have a Sinhalese president, right? Parliament will have more Sinhalese members. So given the fact that government represents mostly the Sinhalese, if the minorities have a problem, if Tamils and Muslims feel like this government does not represent us, right? What prevents y'all from being left out? The civil society. Y'all have that space. Y'all have that space y'all can occupy. You can walk out of your family, get to that middle space, neutral space, and say, here we are the Tamils in this country, we have a problem. We are the Muslims in this country, we have a problem. You can voice out the problems you have, so y'all won't go unheard, right? So that's what Mr. Tocqueville says, that this existence of this civil society is very important. That makes up for that flaw democracy has. Democracy has a flaw because that they sort of overlook the minorities. Overlook the minorities, cannot ethnic minorities always, right? Political minorities who voted against the government, right? Because the majority gets their way in democracy. That's just how it is, right? So the true meaning of democracy is not just going the majority's way. True meaning of democracy is choosing what the majority wants, and in the same time taking care of the minorities as well, making sure minorities aren't left out. But in practicality, democracy sort of have this problem. The governments represent the majority of the people who voted for them, not the minorities. Which is why Tocqueville says that the best thing to do is, right? The best thing to do is occupying, using this civil society, right? Using this civil society as the space to make up for that flow, to make sure that the minorities have a voice. Okay. Simple as that. Right. So let's find out what Mr. Tocqueville says. He'll get someone to read. Okay, Sarah, why don't you read?
Associational democratic interpretation. Out of the 6 interpretations, this interpretation provides the most approximate and familiar one to the modern context. Therefore, the civil society is interpreted as an entity consisted of citizen unions, personal and common desires of people. Especially in terms of democracy, this is considered extremely important. The initial theoretical idea of this interpretation was given by Alexis de Tocqueville in his book Democracy in America in 1835. Tocqueville's opinion of civil society comes from the criticisms of democracy. In a democratic rule, the opinion of the majority is given prominence to respect the will of the majority. However, Tocqueville points out that democracy disregards the opinions of the minority. Under this, the liberty of the minority is fallen, which is in other words a failure of the democratic system. Tocqueville observed that the remedy for this criticism is having an active civil society. He pointed out that America has a system that does not exist in Europe. This is a system where citizens forming unions on religion, business, occupation, education, common good, etc. in order to represent their desire. Tocqueville points out that this entity shields the minority needs under majority rule. Therefore, despite the government bearing a different opinion, citizens can solve problems through discussion instead of forcefully enforcing opinions on each other. Tocqueville referred to this American system as associated democracy or else united democracy. The system also emphasizes political activism of citizens. Therefore, according to Tocqueville, the civil society is a system where active citizens politically participate to be organized for their personal and common requirements external from the state.
Right. So this is Alexis de Tocqueville. It's a picture of him. Right. Which brings us to the last two. These are quite straightforward, very straightforward. Okay. In fact, we can discuss both at once. First, we have civil society as a space for democratic, social, and political activities. Okay. Now in Unit 3, we have a lesson called post-colonial state, right? You know, our countries, Asian, African, South American countries, we were colonized by European nations in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. Okay. So once these colonizers, these Europeans come to our countries, they conquer us. And when they leave, right, they change the systems we had in our countries. Okay. That's what we know as post-colonial state. What we have in Sri Lanka right now is a state format that was given to us by the British, right? We didn't have parliaments or cabinets or elections or whatever. We used to have a king and the king used to control us. That was the system we used to have, right? But in recent times, what has been happening is that these European nations have come to conquer our countries. They gave us democracy and they left, right? So in post-colonial state lesson, we learn that, you guys will learn that in unit 3, right? We learn that normally, right? We learn that normally, in general, the countries, these post-colonial countries, right? They sort of have this issue of maintaining democracy. They have a problem maintaining democracy because the British colonial rulers, British people in these countries were like, okay, this is what democracy is. We are going to leave. You guys need to maintain this is going, like, have elections, have parliaments, keep representation going on. So they taught us the democratic values and they left. But most of the countries failed. Most of the post-colonial states failed to keep that democratic system going. Okay. Now, Sri Lanka is of course an exception. Sri Lanka and India are the only 2 countries in the South Asian region that has managed to keep the democratic rule going since independence, right? Every government we've had come to power through democracy, went out of power through democracy, except for countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Maldives. They always have like a military rule coming, democratic rule, military rule, democratic rule, like going back and forth. Countries like Nepal, Bhutan, in those countries like a monarchy and democratic, monarchy, democratic, like back and forth. But in our country, we haven't had military issues. We haven't had like monarchical issues. We have been having democratic governance going, and Sri Lanka and India are the only 2 countries that has managed to maintain democracy. But that is not the case in most of the post-colonial countries, especially in Africa. In African countries, this has been a huge problem that those countries haven't been following proper democracy. And even South American countries, Central American countries like Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, Panama, right? Those countries, and the South American countries like Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, these countries that they have actually suffered to maintain proper democratic standards. Now, normally in a country, normally in a political system, who protects democracy? Who is known as the blood of democracy? Any of you remember who is known as the blood of democracy? What is known as the blood of democracy? What political institution is known as the blood of democracy? Political parties, right? Political parties are known as the blood of democracy. You need to have a competitive political party system going on, which is why we praise having a multi-party system. Okay, so political parties have to work hard. If the government is like violating the democracy, political parties have to fight to keep the democracy going. But the problem with the mostly Central American countries is that all the political parties existed were heavily corrupted, or they were like, they were wiped out by the government, right? So political parties weren't doing their job to protect democracy. They weren't doing their job, political parties. So democracy was falling in these countries. So when political parties weren't living up to the task, when the political parties were failing to protect democracy, someone had to step up. And who stepped up? The civil society. When political parties were failing to protect the democracy of the country, civil society had to step in, right? So this is the 5th interpretation of civil society. It has that as a, you consider the civil society as a space for democratic, social, political activities, right? Because political systems were losing democracy, and when political parties weren't doing their job, civil society stepped up to protect democracy in the countries. That's one. The other one, civil society as a platform for social movements. I think your generation can understand this the best, right? Last year we saw Black Lives Matter. Right after George Floyd's death, we saw like Instagram and all these social media platforms were taken out by storm. All these celebrities supporting the rights of the minority people, right? Black Lives Matter. It was a social movement. How did Black Lives Matter become so prominent, so significant? Who supported Black Lives Matter? Did the government support Black Lives Matter? Did the political party support Black Lives Matter? No. Who supported Black Lives Matter? Who supported that movement? It was the guys. Say hi to my brother. Yeah, he's here with my coffee. This is Akil. This is Senumi. This is Janisha. This is Sharon. This is Ranali. This is Tarushi. Sprunella. This is Pankaja. This is Sara. And this is Raki. Other ones have their cam switched off. Tell them about the book you are writing these days. So he wrote Hitler's life story as a book. He also wrote a book about the French Revolution. And then he was reading about the Russian Revolution, write a book on that also. So you like communism? You like communism? Yeah, he likes communism. He's a communist. Do you know who was the leader of the Russian Revolution?
Nicholas II.
Huh? Lenin, yes. Nicholas II was the king, the Tsar. Right. Okay, thanks. All right. So what was I saying? Yeah. So Black Lives Matter was not supported by political leaders, neither political parties, no governments. Who supported Black Lives Matter? Normal people. It was us, the general people, right? General people who shared Facebook posts and Instagram posts and stories with the hashtag, Black Lives Matter, right? And it was us. We used civil society as a platform to make that social movement real, to make that social movement live. Okay. So civil society can be used as a platform for these social movements. The best example is Black Lives Matter, because that is very relatable to your generation, right? So civil society, it was a civil society. We were occupying that civil society space. We weren't saying Black Lives Matter inside our families. Were we saying that to our parents? Were we saying that to our friends? No. Did we go and tell that to the states? No. We said that in the civil society. No, especially with the social media. Civil society has received an entire new vast space with social media, because you can share stuff, and there's a virtual civil society created now. Okay, this is a little advanced to you, right? But I believe, as as a political science scholar, I believe that we have a seventh interpretation. Now we have a virtual civil society created because of social media. Okay, that's just a little too advanced for you all. Just studying those six would do. Okay, right. Let's find out about the last two interpretations, right? Munivara, can you read the note?
Civil society as a space for democratic, social, and political activities. The concept of civil society was redefined in 1970s and 80s. Therefore, civil society is considered as an essential feature of political and social democracy. During the time 1920 to 1980, many political movements were born against totalitarian governments in Latin America, Eastern European and Asian countries. Due to the lack of organized political parties, these movements were founded on labor unions, religious organizations, farmers' movements, cultural and art organizations, student unions, etc. These organizations fulfill the duty of political parties, and the function of these organizations were known as the civil society. Civil society as a space of social movements. The term civil society is defined as social movement with citizen participation. Therefore, citizen organizations are born for political goals in democratic as well as non-democratic countries. Example, farmers' movements, youth movements, feminist movements, religious movements, racial movements, professional trade movements, environmental movements, human rights movements, These citizen movements are different from political parties. However, they have clear goals and policies. The collection of these movements is known as the civil society.
Right. So you can see a picture of Black Lives Matter. And that's the most recent example. Okay. Any questions, guys?
For now, it was pretty clear.
Right. So now you have this other small part. Why does political science have an interest in civil society? Now, if you have understood the lesson thus far, this note should make perfect sense to you, right? Because this is very basic. There's nothing for me to explain. If you understood, it should make sense to you why political science has a big interest in civil society, why civil society has become such a prominent area in political science in the recent times. Okay. So Rakib, please read this page also.
Why does political science have an interest in civil society? Civil society groups and movements engage in political and parallel, sometimes complementary to political parties. Civil society represents a political space in which outside and autonomous of the state and of political parties. Civil society offers new space and opportunities for political participation of citizens, which are not fully available with political parties. And an active civil society helps to strengthen the democracy. In political mobilization, civil society take up important public issues that are usually ignored by political parties. By mobilizing the citizens on common issues, civil society movements empower citizens.
Right. So, did you understand? As I told you, if you understand civil society, these should make sense to you. But if you have any doubts, you can ask now. If there was any point that you didn't understand, you can tell me, I'll explain. All cool. Right. Then civil society is also over, which brings us to the last bit. This part, this is normally an overlooked area in the syllabus, right? Because anyway, we study comparative politics in the comparative approach and the remaining parts also. But we'll just go through this as well. So comparative politics means that studying something from a comparative perspective. When you take two or more concepts and put them on with one another in a comparative approach, in a comparative study, in order to understand pros and cons of each. Okay. So comparative approach goes all the way up to ancient Greece, because the founder of our subject, Mr. Aristotle himself, used this approach to write his book Politics, right? Because he studied Greek city-states, 158 Greek city-states in a comparative way. Okay. And there's some work like Samuel P. Huntington and Aaron Lippard. So their books are mentioned here. And then we discuss like why political science emphasize comparative politics, right? So there are three different ways of explaining, three different ways of following comparative politics. Okay. Second. Right. So there are three ways: cross-nation comparison, within country comparison, international comparison. Okay. So these three. So cross-nation comparison is basically when you compare different countries. You take two countries and study. You take USA, the separation of powers in USA and separation of powers in Sri Lanka. Or you take the entire political system at once. You take how does the US politics work? How does the Sri Lankan politics work? Right, like that. That's cross-nation comparison. Within country comparison, obviously, within country means that inside Sri Lanka, How did Sri Lanka function 10 years ago? How does Sri Lanka function now? What sort of a political party UNP is? What sort of political party SLFP is? That's inside the country, right? Specific theme on a global scale is international comparison. You pick one area, rule of law. You pick rule of law and you study different countries in rule of law, right? How does rule of law work in the US? How does rule of law work in Sri Lanka? How does it work in India? How does it work in Britain? And so on and so forth, like that. Right? You pick one specific theme and you study different countries. That's international comparison. Or you take one country as a whole, the second country as a whole, and you compare that. That's cross-nation comparison. Or if you compare things inside the same country, that's within country comparison. Okay. Right. So let's read this part also. Then we are pretty much done with this unit. Okay. Natasha, can you read?
Yes, sir. In comparative politics, politics elements in the society are studied in comparative perspective. Since many political scientists in the history have studied politics in this approach comparatively. Comparative politics was developed as a methodology in political science for quite a long time. Comparative politics became a part of mainstream political science, mostly in a post-World War era. This was intended in American political science and later was established in global political science. American and European political scientists often used to study the third world countries and socialist countries. However, comparative politics has a history that goes up to ancient Greece. Greek philosophers such as Plato, Aristotle followed comparative politics to study better model of states. Also, Nicola Machiavelli applied the comparative politics to write his book, The Friend. Comparative politics was used to study different ruling methods, etc. However, in modern political science, comparative politics is applied to study much more specific elements such as voters' behavior, religious influence, social systems, and class difference, etc. American political scientists specifically suggest a new area to be studied in comparative politics: political behavior, political culture, and political socialization. Following outcomes are examples for studies based on comparative politics. Pattern of Democracy by Alvin Lee Part in 1999. The Third Wave by Samuel P. Gutierrez in 1991. The above mentioned studies statistically data is studied separately, which prevents any normative values. Why does political science emphasize comparative politics? The possibility to compare your country with other country to understand pros and cons better is known as cross-nation comparison. In terms of knowledge, it is important to comprehend the political system of several countries. Compare studies often result in common and general conclusions. How does comparative methodology work? Political science can compare political elements of different countries. This is known as a cross-nation comparison. It is also possible to study political elements of single country through comparative politics, which is known as within country comparison. Comparativity studying a specific theme on a global scale is known as an international comparison.
Right. Thanks, Natasha. That is pretty much it. We are done with Unit 2. So next week we will be starting Unit 3. I've left some space for you all to put, if you want to put any short notes. Then we will be starting Unit 3, and I will be conducting a separate class to do Unit 1 for 2023 students. Okay, new students. And if there are any senior from 2022 batch or 21 batch, if you want to sort of like